Hello and welcome to TALRadio. At TAL, we connect those who are willing to give, those who are in need. My lovely audience and my wonderful viewers, welcome back to this wonderful series called Self-Coaching. And whenever I say self-coaching, you know who's going to be the guest of honor. Let's welcome Andrew Tallents. Andrew, welcome to TALRadio.
Hi, Sandy. Love to be here again.
Thank you so much. And as we can, people who are watching you technically can make out, and people who are listening to you can really make out that there is a certain cold.
Yes, I've been having a cold for 2 weeks, so trying to get rid of it now, but it won't stop us having a great conversation today.
Lovely. So wishing you a speedy recovery. So on that wonderful note, I think as, we were just talking, off the record also, that the season is changing and everything is just changing around us at a very fast pace. And as they say, that change is the only constant in everybody's life. But why do you think that, there's some people who really struggle with transition, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, and I think it's a natural thing for most humans. So it's something that's built into us to resist because it's all about protection and survival and the current conditions that we're aware of, we know we can operate in. So the first thing to accept it is very normal for human beings to think about this. But I think the main problem is when we resist change, it's because we're thinking about the future and sometimes worrying about the future rather than seeing the opportunity. And we're also thinking about the recent past, about how good that was compared to the way it looks as though it's going now. And so again, we're thinking in past or future rather than present. So it's very normal. Human beings don't like change. It's one of the most difficult topics for leaders in terms of lots of literature has been written about this in terms of how you take groups of people through change. And it's not easy. We've got to give time. We've got to let people talk. We've got to let people share their fears because it's normal for people to do that. So we'll have a great journey through the whole topic today.
Lovely. And when you mentioned that people really worry a lot about the future, that is so true. No matter in which part of the world and which part of the stage of life you are in, but you're always worried about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So moving on, from a self-coaching perspective, what is the first step that someone should take when they realize that they are actually entering a period which is going to be about change, basically?
So one of the things that we do as human beings to begin with is we actually make lots of assumptions about what that change is going to lead to. And we believe it. It becomes part of our way we think, and therefore we start to understand that those things might happen to us. So the first thing that everyone can do if they're starting to think about change and worry about it is to really go and seek out the information, the facts of what the change actually is leading to. So many leaders, so many chief executives out there and managers don't spend enough time, because they don't have time, communicating what the implications of the changes will be. However, if you go and ask your manager, go and ask your leader in the organization what the changes are in detail, then you can't necessarily assume things anymore because you know the facts. So that's the first thing. Find out the facts, remove the assumptions, and at least we can start to work with what we know is going to happen rather than what we think is going to happen.
Lovely. In fact, when we were mentioning about all these factors, I could really imagine myself, and especially, it's like an exercise that probably, maybe I'm not an expert, but I think since we both write a lot, and people from our generation write a lot of things. So since you mentioned that people should really, look at the facts first. It's better to write down, jot down, and then you said about assumptions also, write them also down. And I think people will really have a better clarity of what is in store for them.
Yeah, and we've got to watch out for those friends around us and colleagues that are the people who we don't want to have around because they're giving us all these ideas about what it could mean and they're panicking. And so let's not spend time with those friends.
The saboteurs that we have spoken about, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, many people really resist change. As you mentioned, that it's basically the fear of the unknown, the fear of uncertainty. But how can individuals coach themselves to move from resistance and to accept things in life?
I love this question. So people might not think this, but with every single piece of resistance that we feel as human beings, so that's whether we stop ourselves from doing something, whether there's a thought that holds us back, whatever it is, there's usually a lovely piece of intelligence in there. There's some insight, there's some gift for us. as long as we stay with the resistance, that feeling, and try and be curious about where is it coming from, what's it being fed by, does it have any fact behind it, and just really staying with it and exploring it. Now, once we do that, sometimes it makes it easier for us to accept that we have those thoughts and feelings. It goes back to your point around acceptance. So that doesn't mean we need to change the way we feel about it, because it takes time to change. But at least we can accept that it's us that's causing the problem around our thoughts, not the change that's happening around us, it's us. And once we accept, it makes it easier in time to actually start to maybe change the way we think about it. That's the first thing. Really be curious about the resistance. Don't just ignore it. And, so many people do that. Be really curious about where it's coming from and talk it over with some people. Sometimes you get this gut feeling in your stomach that stops you. Sometimes we get headaches. Sometimes we just notice, pain across our chest because we're feeling anxious. So let's be curious about where those feelings might be coming from.
True. As I say, nature always gives you a sign when something about to happen, whether it's good or bad, but you always get a sign.
Yeah, and accept it.
That's true. Very, very true. So moving on, especially when we talk about leaders and team, what are some of the common emotional responses that, teams or technically people at leadership level, I would say, really experience like during a transition period?
Well, there's a really a conflict feeling that comes up for leaders, because once they know that the change needs to happen, it could be a big change, a small change, they need to communicate that with the people that it affects because they're the leader. At the same time, they still need to do their day job of deliver whatever needs to happen today as they're managing the change. So what tends to happen is that leaders are usually very time poor. So what it means is they have to make a choice. Do I actually focus on getting the things done? Or do I focus on communicating what these changes mean to the management and to the people in the organization? So there's this conflict that usually sits. And if they go into automatic mode and just do, which lots of leaders do, they'll forget about the communication. Whereas again, if they just be the leader and understand what's required right now, they'll know whether they need to create some space and time for their employees to vent, share, communicate, share their fears, whatever it might be, so they can go through this acceptance stage and then again move forward. So I think that's the challenge that leaders have: how much time to spend on doing and how much time to spend on being with their people that are going through the change.
That's wonderful, because that leads me to my next question again about leaders, since you work so much with them, across the globe. So how can leaders really maintain clarity and focus when everything around them feels very uncertain and unstable, in fact?
There are two elements here. We've talked a little bit about these in previous episodes. So the first is change is happening at the moment because we're trying to move towards a goal that the organization we work for or lead has set. So we need to keep our mind on that's where we're going, and the change will allow us to get there, even though we may need to go 2 steps back to go 1 step forward. That's sometimes the case. So we need to reconnect with that and reconnect our team and employees with that. So what's the vision, where we're going? The second thing is personal. So as a leader working for this organization where we're going to this particular goal, what's important to me about why we get there? What's that why for me in terms of what I'm doing this for? Whether that's personal satisfaction, personal reward, financial reward, pride, whatever it might be. I need to reconnect to that to again make sure I've got my compass, my North Star about that's where we're going. Because change is inevitable, where it goes round and round and round and round. If we connect to those two things, normally it means we can come back to, again, the decisions that need to be made in the interest of those two areas. And it normally makes sense to people.
I love when you say the change is something that goes round and round. It really does, basically. So, moving on, when you speak about leaders, especially, their mindset. So what role does their mindset play in successfully navigating change within the organization or within the team, I guess?
So there are two elements to this. So the first is a really strong leader of change recognizes, as you said right at the start, change is constant. So it's not something that we choose to do. It's not something that we elect to do or things that we actually just happen to us every now and again. It's happening all the time. So the mindset is we've got to accept that and work with it. So a good way to describe this is, I think we've talked about this before, a fast flowing river that meanders around all different places. And to survive, we've got to make sure if we're in that river and we're flowing in it with the current, that we're really agile and go with the moment. So we've just got to accept that. The second thing is then recognizing as the leader that everybody else in the organization won't have that mindset. And therefore, we need to be accommodating, patient, kind. We need to make sure we over communicate, because a lot of those people won't necessarily cope with the change as well. So there's this two thing, mindset of positivity and acceptance, and then actually empathy, understanding and communication with the people around us. And again, two very different kinds of mindsets to have as a leader.
So that was about the leaders, and I'm sure they really do a wonderful task whenever they manage a team or an organization. Just talking about like normal people, like, people listening to us, I would say.
Yeah.
So are there any practical self-reflection questions that people can ask themselves when they're facing like a major transition at the workplace?
Yeah, so there's a really lovely exercise to do here, which is a bit of a brainstorm, really. So everyone listening to this or watching this, if you are in a position of change now, I'd make 2 columns on a piece of paper or on a writing device. On the left-hand side, we write at the top, things that we are not happy about the change. And then write down all the things that we're not happy about. There'll be lots of them. And then the right-hand column, we write opportunities because of the change. Can we write those? Now, when you do this exercise, you will normally have a very long list of the things that we're not happy about.
True.
And you'll have a very short list of the opportunities, because that's our normal default position as a human. So I would do that exercise the first time and notice that the left-hand list is longer than the right-hand list. Then what I would do is then speak with a few people about the list you've written and what you've written down as opportunities, and see what they're thinking. And they will have their own opportunities. And over a period of a week or so, you will find that the list on the right, the opportunities, will start to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And the list on the left will actually get smaller and smaller, because you're changing your mindset over time by recognizing there are 2 sides to the actual problem. We've got worries and concerns, and then we've got opportunities. So the only way to work through change is to recognize there's always an opportunity, and either you're going to take it or you're going to let someone else take it. And it's up to you. But we've got to go through that exercise first to recognize there are 2 sides to the seesaw.
Well, when you mentioned that, that the opportunities, either you take it or you let somebody else take it, this is an amazing, famous saying that, opportunity knocks your door sometimes in life. Please listen to it carefully.
Absolutely.
So moving on, we just talked about, the team members. Now getting back to the leaders. So leaders often guide, their team through changes. But how can they themselves manage their own emotions while supporting the team?
So we talked a little bit about, there's probably 3 ways that leaders can do this. So the first is having somebody outside of the organization that doesn't really know the organization, so that they can not pay them necessarily, but have them as somebody they can just go to as a sounding board. So what that leader can do is actually go off and vent and get angry and frustrated. And we need that opportunity to get it all out, if you like, but not to somebody in the organization, because that's counterproductive. Somebody outside the organization, a friend or a former colleague. That's the first thing that we can do, just to clear our minds. The second thing to do is to speak to our leader. So whether that is the board or the chief executive or another leader in the organization who is responsible for us, just to really be clear about them, to communicate to them what your plans are for the change. And is that the right thing that they're feeling? Is there anything that they would do differently? Just to check in and get some expectation management. So it gives you some confidence that you're going to get some support from that more superior leader. And then the third, we talked about this a lot, is having space and time just to think. So rather than just doing all the time, stepping back 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just thinking about what it is that I've just done, what is it I need to do, and what can I do to keep that kind of mindset, which is very calm, around me, so that other people inspire confidence through that. So they're the 3 things really that I think a lot of leaders can do as they're leading through change.
And talking about staying calm and the environment and everything, I think your backdrop, your office really says a lot about that. It literally feels that, absolutely, I'm sitting like across the globe, but I can really feel that calmness on the screen itself. Yeah. So moving on, what are some of the daily practices that one can help individuals to stay resilient and adaptable during, I would say, not so good times, the difficult times or the changing times?
Yeah. So this is all about communication and sharing how you're feeling with someone you trust. So in your organization, there's always going to be somebody that feels similar to you. So they're feeling uncertain, they're feeling nervous, they're feeling a little bit worried about the future because of the changes. So what I encourage you to do is to be the adult in the relationship with that individual and get into a conversation, maybe 10, 20, 30 minutes, and just agree that the conversation can't have any negativity in it. It's got to have curiosity in it. It's got to have lots of space where we can talk about what we're feeling and the challenges that we're facing, but try and look at it from a positive perspective towards the opportunity. And if you have a number of those discussions with that accountability partner, that buddy within the organization, it soon starts to snowball into a more positive attitude each day because you're supporting each other. It's very difficult to do that on your own because you're in your own head, but with somebody else you can do that. So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing you can do, links to the point we talked about the leader, is again, try and reflect on when I'm feeling negative about the change, how much of that is in my own head and my own self-limiting beliefs and what I'm assuming as opposed to what's really going on. So really checking that and just sensing it. And then the third thing is really thinking about, in the next day, how can I actually make sure that I limit the time that I'm thinking about the future, thinking about the past, and I'm just taking the opportunity in the present. And if I'm not doing that, find ways to do it by shifting energy, by shifting task, by shifting environment, because sometimes those things themselves allow us to just think a bit more in the present. And we talked a lot about this, Sandy, haven't we, in the past? But it's the one key thing, because if we're doing that, we cannot worry about the future and we cannot think about the past.
I wish we all can inculcate these 3 steps in our life. Seriously, Andrew.
We all can. We all can.
Yeah, that's so true. So, since you work so much with, people from, different parts of the world, the leaders, the teams. So can you share an example or a story from your, a live example basically that you've gone through that, where embracing a change led to unexpected growth and opportunities?
Yeah, this is a really lovely example. So it was a leadership team in an industry which is quite complex. They had quite a complex supply chain. And they were experiencing poor performance. They'd had a new leader come into the organization, start leading it. And they had this great idea that what they would do is actually speak to their customers. They'd not spoken to their customers really before. They thought they knew what their customers wanted. So they were in a place where the change wasn't great because they were going down in terms of performance, and they knew they needed to change to become much more responsive. So what they did is they did not just customer surveys, but actually went out to their customers. So both the leader and the various team members went out to their customers and said, look, we know that we've not been doing that well recently in terms of meeting your expectations. If you could wave the magic wand tomorrow and ask us anything that we could do to make your life as a customer more enriched, more valuable, and that you'd stay with us for the next year, what would it be? And they just got lots of interesting feedback from various stakeholders and customers. And they brought it all back to a big session, which they did over a day. And what they found was actually what the customer was asking for were already things that they could do. It's just that they'd not been doing them. So what they needed to do is just change their mindset to say, we can do this. We already have the skills, the expertise. We just need to understand what it is the customer wants and then give it to them, as opposed to us deciding what the customer wanted. So this was a period of 6 months. They had to go through a change of mindset, or go through a change of the way they were working, or go through a change of the way they respond to the customer, because they had to be much more agile and responsive. And within 6 months, we're finding that sales were improving, profitability was improving, and they had more loyalty from their customers. So that one change of accepting that they didn't know the answer and then seeking what the answers were from their customer base enabled them to get this kind of activation and catalyst to start moving forward and change the way they operated as a team. So that's probably the most recent example I've got.
That's so lovely. In fact, just taking that decision must have been a change for them, the company itself, that, going out to the customers and talking to them, getting their feedback. And I think that must have been quite a big change in itself for them.
Absolutely.
So on that wonderful note, I'm going to wrap up this very lovely segment. But before I let you go, I have one last question on this wonderful topic that, for all the listeners and all the people who are listening to us at the moment, what is that one powerful self-coaching principle that they can really apply in their lives while they are facing a transition phase? So
there are 2 words: acceptance that the change is happening rather than resisting it. And then secondly, look for the opportunity. And if we can accept and look for the opportunity, there are many gifts out there as we all navigate change.
Lovely. Those are really words of wisdom, I would say. So finally, on this wonderful note, I'm going to wrap up this lovely segment of this wonderful series called Self-Coaching. Andrew, thank you so much. And Andrew, if the people who want to get, listening to us at the moment really want to reach out to you, what is that wonderful way?
The best way is just to go to andrewtallents.com or go to LinkedIn and type in Andrew Tallents. There is only one Andrew Tallents on LinkedIn.
I love every time you say that there's only one Andrew Tallents.
There is.
Believe it or not, I've actually tried it.
There is.
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much. And thanks a ton to our lovely audience. Thank you and have a great day ahead and keep on listening to TALRadio.